By the conclusion of the Civil War, Illinois had ceased to be the frontier. Land seekers had pushed into Iowa, Nebraska, and Kansas, and struggled to define their societies as slave or free. Gold prospectors had raced to California by way of Panama, and white settlers had followed John C. Fremont into the Rocky Mountain West. Illinois' Native American population had either succumbed to disease or scattered to Indian Territory in present-day Oklahoma. Northern Illinois was the last region of the state to be settled by white Americans, but it grew the most rapidly. As Illinois became a part of the nation's dynamic core, and not the frontier, Chicago arose as the West's major staging area for further settlement. The Erie Canal had connected the Great Lakes with the Hudson River, effectively linking Illinois with New York City. New railroads grew with greater rapidity after the Civil War, and Chicago's advantageous location at the nexus of the Great Lakes and Mississippi Valley made it a natural rail center as well. The emergence of Chicago as a major rail hub signaled the decline of the thriving commercial traffic that had plied the Mississippi River in the antebellum era. Increasingly, towns like Quincy, Alton, and Cairo fell upon hard times as the Illinois Central Railroad served Gulf of Mexico ports and the nation's settlement movement pushed beyond the Great River. Farmers also faced declining prospects in this era, prompting rural youth to seek their fortunes in the city. The new railroads carried manufactured goods from the east into Chicago, where the city's merchants organized them for sale, marked them up in price, and distributed them across the western states. Likewise, the city's entrepreneurs gathered in the vast region's agricultural products, including timber as well as livestock and grain, into vast warehouses and factories. Such economic activity made Chicago a wealthy city and attracted waves of immigrants eager to share in the prosperity. The city's disastrous fire of 1871 proved only a temporary inconvenience, as New York capital poured in to finance rebuilding. The work attracted even more immigrants eager to find jobs building new structures. Most of the new immigrants came to America from southern and eastern Europe, as well as Ireland. Many arrived in cities where friends or family members had already established themselves. This strategy identified favorable locations for immigration and helped to build new communities. Nevertheless, many immigrants faced housing segregation and limited opportunities in business, the trades, and unions. Often immigrants responded by asserting themselves in economic sectors largely overlooked by native-born whites. In the 1870s and 1880s, Chicago became a city of newcomers, with a new population that dwarfed the native-born elites who had arrived before the Civil War. This often unstable mix clashed over issues like the regulation or outright prohibition of alcoholic beverages. Many Yankee reformers, such as Francis Willard, identified alcohol abuse as a leading cause of poverty, family disintegration, and violence against women. All too often, they believed, men squandered their paychecks on strong drink, leaving their families to starve. But many of the new immigrants came to America from societies in which beer and wine played central roles. German Americans, outraged at the Republican Party's tilt toward the reformers' position, switched their allegiance to the Democrats in this period. Many Irish had come to Illinois in the decades before the Civil War to help build the Illinois and Michigan Canal. In the years after the conflict, they formed increasingly strong community organizations, many times around the Catholic Church. The cause of Irish independence from England also informed many groups, including an unfortunate armed sortie into British Canada at the Civil War's close. In the Gilded Age, Irish Americans played significant roles in the formation of labor unions, especially the Knights of Labor. The Irish technique of the boycott gave the Knights and other unions a powerful new tool in their struggle to match the economic, political, and legal power of employers. Other immigrants brought radical intellectual and political traditions to America. German and Eastern European immigrants played large roles in the organization of Chicago's socialist and anarchist movements. When these movements emerged in the spotlight caused by the Great Strike of 1877 and, especially, the Haymarket Riots of 1886, many middle-class, native-born whites quickly associated radicalism and labor violence with immigrants. While some reform groups worked to inculcate immigrants with Yankee virtues of thrift and self-control, Jane Addams' Hull House developed in part to help immigrants to organize themselves. Addams, the daughter of a wealthy Illinois businessman, took up her work in part to learn from immigrants who represented other societies and cultures. By 1892, Illinois had elected its first foreign-born governor, John Peter Altgeld, and immigrant political leaders worked to find roles in Chicago's city government. Nevertheless, many immigrants and their children continued to face discrimination and limited opportunities, and often relied upon their own ethnic communities for social life and business activities.